Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunders, and today we're joined by paranormal investigator and researcher John Fraser. How are you, John?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm locked down a little bit, but free in spirit.
Well, that's good to know. With Halloween coming up, we thought we'd invite John. He's a veteran investigator. He's been a member of the Ghost Club and SPR for many years. I think he's shaking his head there because he doesn't quite like to be called a veteran, but he's still young at heart. A ghost investigator. Now, what I was very interested in finding out, John, was about some of your more memorable experiences. A lot of the times we talk about what other people have done. I want to know what you've done when it comes to investigating the paranormal. And I'd probably like you to start at the beginning, because I know you talk about Sandwood Bay sometimes, and I think that's something that our listeners and viewers would like to hear about. What happened at Sandwood Bay in Scotland?
What happened at Sandwood Bay in Scotland? Well, Sandwood Bay is probably the ultimate of the romantic ghost hunt. And I decided one day I just wanted to go up there and investigate it. That was when I was slightly younger. I do object to the veteran tag, but I was slightly younger in those days. Now, Sandwood Bay is a very, very unique place, because it is right in the very tip of north of Scotland, 4 miles from the nearest road, and surrounded by peat bogs and shifting sands. So I when I was just starting out in ghost hunting, decided that would be the ultimate ghost hunt, because once you were there, you couldn't leave until dawn, otherwise you'd probably get stuck in the peat bogs. So I luckily managed to get funding from this, not from the Ghost Club, not from the Society of Psychical Research, but from a Liberal International Youth Foundation, because I happened to be involved in the Liberals, and there happened to be a conference halfway up Scotland. So thank you very much, Liberal International Youth Foundation, for starting my ghost hunt career. They subsidised me as far as Cooper, and then I took off into the wilderness. Now, there's a funny thing about Sutherland. You pass ruins castles which aren't open to the public, aren't closed to the public, just there, which are haunted, and old houses, and then you spend the night in haunted hotels, and then you eventually get to your destination. Except in my case, I was silly enough to have a meal first of all and get my torch recharged, and then I set off, leaving the torch at the restaurant. Still undaunted, setting sun, miles from anywhere, drove the car as far down the track as I possibly could, which for a 20-year-old car wasn't a bad way, and I set off to spend the night in a haunted house by myself to try and find out what it felt like.
We should point out, so John, I know you didn't say your age there, but I think you were a teenager at this time, weren't you? You weren't very old.
I was in my earliest 20s, actually.
Earliest 20s, okay.
Yeah, I don't think I can remember when I was a teenager. No, it's rumoured that I did join us up in the first year it was founded. But then I got to the old cottage, which at the time had a roof in it. Now, to give you a bit of background, Sandwood Bay is supposed to be haunted by the ghost of a bearded sailor. And there's been various sightings along the way and various articles written about it, and it's fairly well authenticated. Now, suddenly realised didn't have my torch. Sun was setting, and I suddenly started to see strange lights on the brow of a hill, which I eventually realised were sheep walking in the twilight. So I eventually settled down. And I must admit, probably for my first time in ghost hunting, probably because I've never done a ghost hunt before, since in the middle of nowhere, I started to get a little bit nervous, and I started to set a fire because in the chimney place. And what better way to set a fire was in the renowned fiction, by using one of the books of the renowned fiction, so-called factual author, Elliot O'Donnell, who I do not have a spot for. Unfortunately, as you can see, even his books don't burn very well. So, actually, not much happened that night, but two things which are very important. First of all, I was enthralled by the romance of ghost hunting, and I have continued that for a number of years. And secondly, after I'd got up the next morning, I actually decided that ghost hunting is as much about doing research. And I actually thoroughly talked to lots of people in the local villages. And there was actually a fascinating theory, because Bothy, under a kilometre away, there was at the time, and for about 20 years previously, an old hermit by the name of James McVeary Smith. Now, his bothy is actually part of the Bothy's associations, and it has wonderful paintings which he did at the time. And James McVeary Smith, if anyone wants to Google a picture of him, is the spitting image of a bearded sailor. Wizened beard, weather-worn face, and I'm wondering whether the people that did see the bearded sailor actually saw McVeary Smith coming back from the local bar a little bit worse for wear. So there may be a natural explanation to this ghost story, but if you ever go up Sandwood Bay, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter if it's haunted or not. It's a wonderfully spooky place, but not to be done at Halloween. It would be too cold then.
You were by yourself then, is that right? You were in the.
That's correct. Yes.
Would you? What do you think of someone that did that now? Would you suggest it now, doing that? Your older self? Would you investigate some place that was so isolated by yourself?
I actually just the other a couple of months ago, just after lockdown eased, I decided just to walk up Chanctonbury Rings to spend the night there, just to see what was happening. But I didn't actually spend a full night there because there was about 7 or 8 other people that had decided to do the same thing in the same night, which rather ruined the whole point of it. But yes, in principle, I would. The only thing putting people off doing Sandwood Bay now is it used to have a roof, and sometime mysteriously between 1988 and 1994, when I next visited it, the roof paranormally disappeared. So you really would be in the wild camping stage.
So that was your first paranormal investigation. You obviously went on to be a member of the Ghost Club and SPR and other organisations and do lots of investigation. You often tell me about an investigation you did at the House of Detention in Clerkenwell, which I find very interesting. Can you maybe tell us how that went? Because that's somewhere I don't know that that you can actually get into. Often I've been there for another event, which wasn't anything to do with ghosts. It was actually I think it was some kind of Dracula TV show, a game show actually, which was a bit of fun, but wasn't any kind of ghost hunt. How did that come about? The House of Detention investigation.
First of all, I should also mention briefly that very few of these stories are actually going to have a punchline of a ghost at the end. Ghost hunting's a bit like fishing. You can spend ages. Probably the only time I have ever seen anything which was all the fire exits flying open was at the Cosworth RAF Aircraft Museum, which I investigated was Peter Underwood, and Peter Underwood thought he saw a shadowy figure of a man. But these are tales of ghost hunting, partly for the fun of it, and partly what you can learn about the psychology through doing it. And probably one of the best places for psychology is the House of Detention, which used to be a prison museum stroke chamber of horrors, which used to be open to the public and which the Ghost Club rented out for the night in the early 2000s for the pricely sum of £45, which I believe it's now a film set. Last I heard it was charging about £1,200 a night. So it's either the Ghost Club kudos or the fact that people hadn't cottoned on to how popular these things were. But anyway, What's interesting about the House of Detention is I've given it's actually based in Clerkenwell, London, and it's the underground remains of a huge Victorian remand prison. Now, it's been done up slightly like a chamber of horrors, and it's also got out of bounds areas, which of course nothing is out of bounds to the Ghost Club, which are basically tunnels that have been unexplored for about 40 years. So that combination is actually quite electric and probably is very good fodder for psychologists and anomalistic psychologists especially, who think people can be freaked out by investigating the paranormal. Because the interesting thing here is, whilst nothing actually happened physically at the House of Detention, we did find that one by one, our investigators, especially the psychics, but not only the psychics, were picking up all kinds of interesting things. One psychic picked up the smell of burning flesh, which kind of freaked everybody out. And there was a particular hard-headed investigator, an ex-civil servant, who kind of wandered off by himself, which is probably not the thing to do into the out-of-bounds area, and is probably as totally unpsychic as they come, and suddenly heard voices in his head telling them how they'd been falsely imprisoned and executed for crimes they didn't commit, and asking him for help. So what did we learn from here, apart from having an amazing night in a very, very spooky place, is the fact that there is a certain amount of autosuggestion, because I mentioned earlier that the House of Detention is a remand prison. Mainly debtors and petty criminals and so on. Nobody would ever have been executed there, and what was almost certainly being picked up. And my colleague totally accepted that, would have been probably in his own mind. So we start to wonder, can we ever prove ghosts by spending the night in old spooky places? In the in Sandwood Bay, I saw floating images which turned out to be sheep, but who knows, I might not have investigated that. In House of Detention, my colleague suddenly hears voices from the dead when they couldn't be from the dead because they couldn't possibly have died in that way. So it makes ghost hunting a very complicated process indeed.
So how did you find the place though? Do you think there was anything there, or it was all just people thought it was spooky and therefore they were spooked?
There may be something there. On our particular night, it was a wonderful example of people finding it spooky and getting spooked. But if you bear in mind that a few years before, I'd spent the night all by myself in a haunted croft in the middle of nowhere and saw floating sheep. By there I was pretty hard-headed. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, nothing really phases me, which is unfortunate because that's part of the attraction of being in a ghost hunt. But I can well imagine people getting phased by it, and as I say, it does make wonderful fodder for the anomalistic psychologists, and does make us ask the question, can we ever prove ghosts by spending the night in an old spooky house?
Well, you've since you began your paranormal investigation career in Sandwood Bay, you've written a couple of books, and the most recent one is about poltergeists. Have you done much investigations of poltergeists?
Oh yes, I did a detailed. Probably more recently, I've probably become what I'd call a paranormal researcher, which means I spend a couple of hours in the old haunted house, but don't usually spend extended nights there. That probably dates back to my time at Chingle Hall when I spent the night there. I tried driving home, and that wasn't a good idea. I got home safely in the end, but not to be recommended. Always find a place to sleep. But yes, I did an extended research project in a place called Cage St Joseph's, but probably one that's even more interesting, because there's been a lot said. I've said a lot about the cage in the past. is the good old poltergeist at Pontefract, which is known as the Black Monk of Pontefract. Now, again, I spent the night there and very little happened. Now, to show how unlucky a ghost hunter I am, the people I was spending the night with had it for 2 nights, and the second night, the place went absolutely berserk, crashes, bangs, coming from a particular room. The 2 people I stayed with are actually skeptics, and are actually now scratching their head and wondering if their belief system has changed. So, as I say, ghost hunting is a little bit like fishing. You might catch something, you might not. But what I think is particularly interesting about places like the council house in Pontefract, which has become known as a Black Monk Pontefract case, is when you get poltergeist activity, as I say in that book that you mentioned earlier, you get not feelings, not cold shivers, not things from the corner of your eye, but things actually moving, audible crashes and bangs that can be recorded. And this, I think, is the key for paranormal investigation to getting beyond just clever Halloween stories to actually becoming something we can prove or disprove. Another little bit of background about the Black Monk is there is absolutely zero chance that it's haunted by a black monk. It's just a little addition somebody gave because they saw somebody in a long robe. Now, the council house is basically what used to be licorice fields, and there's a rumour the Black Monk was hung in the vicinity. I don't know of many medieval traditions of hanging people in licorice fields. Far better to make some sweets out of them.
All right. Well, 8:52. How do you want to finish this? I'm going to edit this bit out because you took me by surprise there. Do you want to
ask me a question or two, and
Okay, so John, with the new book that's been out for a couple of months, we did an interview with you at the start of the lockdown, where we sort of went into the poltergeists. Have you had? What are the kind of reactions to the book have you been getting? Because yours is a serious account. I think a lot of the poltergeist cases become fodder for sort of Hollywood type of entertainment. You're a much more serious investigator than that. What has been the reaction to what you've written?
Mainly positive. One or 2 skeptics don't quite understand the concept I make of poltergeist possibly engulfing most of the paranormal. But what I wanted to do is start a debate. Are poltergeists mischievous spirits from the afterlife, or are they something within us? Now, that's all explained in chapter 10. But what I wanted to do is start a debate, and I think we've started that fairly successfully. So I can think of nothing better, now that you can't do trick or treat on Halloween, than settling down with a good spooky book, which has an interesting theory to the paranormal stuck on at the end.
Well, I've not read it yet, John, but I do need to get a copy now that I know that it's out. Because I know when we first had the conversation, the book wasn't out, but it's out now, and I'll put a link to how people can buy a copy of it. We only really scratched the surface, scratch the surface of your ghost hunting career, and I'd love to get you back to maybe talk about one of your cases a little bit more in depth, and maybe go into some of your theories about, maybe some more famous cases.
Absolutely, but I think a little snippet is what was needed for Halloween in any case.
I think so. Well, you have a great Halloween, and every day is Halloween in the Spooky Isles. So we look forward to seeing you the next time.
Been a pleasure.